Okay, we are live, Seth. This is Absolute AppSec, episodes number 7. I'm Ken Johnson, and I'm a co-host, Seth Law.
Hey, everybody.
So last week we had, oh my God, I'm blanking. Last week, Kevin Cody.
Last
I'm sorry,
week
Kevin Cody.
Cody.
Yeah.
Yep.
I am so fried today. Last week was Kevin Cody. Next week, we're going to be joined with by Jason Haddix. He's going to jump on the podcast. So that should definitely be interesting.
Yeah, all sorts of opinions about Bug Crowd. And I mean, Jason works for bugcrowd.com for anybody that doesn't know. So his opinions on bug bounty are going to be interesting compared to what we've talked about previously, right? With Jerry and with others about from a researcher perspective, it'll be a good take from him on how it's actually run, how the company's structured. Should be fun.
Yeah, and I'm hoping he's gonna teach me how to give me the secret to share the secret with you and I on getting that sweet bug money.
sweet bug bounty money.
Yeah,
I'm sure he will, right? I mean, he's done multiple talks and things like that on how to go about it. But I think a lot of it has to do with discipline. But we'll get into that next week with him. I think that'll be a good introduction for anybody. Oh, no sponsor. Neil, nobody's ever been a sponsor. No guest is what you should be saying.
Oh, is that in the chat? Oh, hi, Neil. No sponsor this week. Fun. Yeah, if we've got sponsors, I want some money or at least something. Challenge coin.
Yeah.
Something.
Today is sponsored by my hamster that escaped over the weekend. Yeah, there you go.
Did your hamster really escape over the weekend?
Well, yeah, it did. I won't put much on it, but having kids and then they leave the lid off the food tray, and then the hamster disappears one night. Yeah, that's always fun. So if anybody has any good tips on catching hamsters without, humanely, that would probably be good. The 5-year-old is very concerned.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. Hopefully you guys find it or find one that looks a lot like the old one and slip it into the cage.
Yes, there you go. We can do that. Anyway, that doesn't have anything to do with application security, but that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, and I don't know if we've ever said this, you can ask us anything. It doesn't have to be just AppSec related. Sponsored by Content Security Policy from Jimmy Mesta.
Sweet, Jimmy. Send us stickers then.
But yeah, you can ask us whatever. I mean, this is kind of just going through.
Be informal, right? That's what we've always wanted it to be. So, but along those lines, right, as far as the podcast is concerned, we do have plans to launch on both Stitcher and iTunes and actually do an RSS feed for audio only for those of you that have been asking. Doesn't look like it's too complex, but it just means that we've got to get all our ducks in a row so that we're actually pushing those things out. You will notice some branding and things like that around the podcast. That's mostly just because we wanted it to look, well, we didn't necessarily want my face on every single podcast, even though for some reason that seemed to be what was happening. So when you go to the YouTube page, now you'll see a little graphic there, and you can still find my face if you would like.
I just like having you there to blame you if this goes horribly wrong.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe we should have Jimmy Mesta on sometime too if he's listening. And Neil.
And Neil.
What's up with that? I mean, I know it's only like what, 4 o'clock or like 10 o'clock in the morning for him or something like that.
6 hours. So it should be 1 p.m. where he's at, I think.
Yeah. Okay. See, so he's awake. Wouldn't be not like our European listeners, right?
Is my mom hanging out in Europe now? Is that what's going on?
You
Oh yeah. And so yeah, and on that note, we should probably mention. Okay, so it's been pretty informal, and it will continue to be informal. But at least we're setting up a website. We're gonna have a Slack channel y'all can hang out in. It'll be easier to because I've been having a hard time with a 5-hour difference at this time of year, says Neil. But yeah, so I'm having an issue with like posting links into the YouTube chat and it actually showing up correctly. That's been a problem every time. So we'll rectify that by and having like a better historical log with Slack. Website will allow you to sign up through the website for that. And what else? Like you said, RSS feeds and audio only versions and stuff like that. So
yeah, I mean, eventually, I think we would like to start pushing out some of the topics and things like that that we talk about into blog posts or something like that. But that's not all set in stone yet, right? I mean, obviously, for Ken and I, this is just something we've always wanted to do and get together and talk about application security. So, if people want to respond, that's great. But we will drop links in there probably from the different episodes and the interesting things that we're talking about or that guests bring up with us. Cool. So that brings us to tonight. Obviously, tonight, no guest. It's just Ken and I, but we do have a list of things that we wanted to talk about. We could reprise some things depending on what people are interested in. I don't think we'll dig into CSP internals, right? Unless Ken wants to stumble through that again.
CSP internals or cores? Are we talking about cores?
Of course, whatever.
Yeah.
Oh no, you can talk CSP if you want to as well, right?
Yeah. Let's get right on that. Let's talk about that all night.
Okay.
The internals of that.
Mm-hmm. How that works.
Yeah. Although I think we have touched on it before, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure. When we start talking security headers and the way that all of that works, we talked about it a little bit last week with Kevin Cody. So if you're interested in that, pull that episode up. We got a little bit in there on security headers. Tonight, though, I'm not sure where you want to start, Ken.
Yeah, we can start with the Tesla public cloud environment. Although I'll say this about so if for those who don't know, it basically attackers found a Kubernetes administrative interface publicly exposed. I don't think it had any credentials at all, if I'm not mistaken. And within it, meaning to access it through the administrative console. And then, and I'm kind of rereading it had AWS credentials that had access to non-public S3 data for Tesla, and that was exposed. So I guess the whole thing with this, like from my point of view, is that I personally, and I know we've been talking about this for several years now. I mean, this is like and Chris Gates, who we're definitely going to have on. He and I have done DevOps talks on this, which is basically like insecure tooling with default on the internet, which have overly permissive creds stored in there, or just creds at all, and using that to pivot in. I think that one thing they brought up, and we showed this in like at our talk in RSA, or DevOps talk at RSA, Chris had found on one, like I think it was open Redis boxes. He had found a bunch of them that were effectively being used. Like their utilization percentage, I think, was over 90%, which is really weird for a Redis box. And he had found that they were being used to crypto mine. And then on top of that, he actually tracked down a little bit of information on the person doing it, or the group doing it, whatever. And gosh, I can't remember the amount of money, but it was a lot of money they were making off that. So yeah, that's kind of I guess that's the same. It just hit Tesla.
So what
Same
was the
story.
chain there, right? If we're digging into specifics, there was something with the S3 buckets, but how did they gain access?
Well, they discovered the Kubernetes administrative interface, which is probably something like you could get with Shodan or something along those lines.
Okay.
I don't know. I have one article in front of me, not a whole bunch of them. So, and this, let's see. Oh my goodness.
So yeah, I mean, from what Jerry was posting, because he was the one that brought this to our attention to actually talk about it a little bit, right? So the admin console was exposed, and it contained the credentials for their AWS environment, which included the non-public Tesla data that was in S3, right? And yeah.
I mean, this report, I don't know. This can't be accurate, or maybe it can be. I don't know. It says 73% of and I need to put this in the chat. It says 73% of organizations allow the root user account to be used to perform activities. I mean, I question on which activities, but it's definitely known that that's I don't want to name names of corporations, but I know a few that basically will say you're
on Angie's list again. No.
Yeah, no, not in. No, and I'm not picking. I'm actually saying like these are companies that are what you might consider an enterprise level company. They're not having these issues. Now they are having issues, but different to like we'll say root account usage. So I'm not sure if these are like smaller groups or I don't know. I could be completely wrong too. I'm just going by what this report says. Let me put it in chat.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm reading that paragraph right now. I mean, I think from what they're trying to say is that organizations are allowing access to the root account on AWS, right? Which is the super admin that can do anything. I mean, that account has to exist, but I don't necessarily see that as the issue with this Tesla hack, right? Or this Tesla exposure.
No, definitely not. I mean, root account, like that would have been a way worse situation. Trying to read, I'm trying to figure out where Jimmy got this quote from. Is it in that article? Basically, it says, I'm guessing he found it somewhere else, or I'm just not reading some piece of this right. But basically, it says one of the pods or Kubernetes storage containers included login credentials for a broader Tesla Amazon. Oh no, okay, yeah. So sorry. So yeah, basically that for whatever reason I was reading that wrong. That was what we understood was the administrative interface. I actually didn't say if it was default in what we were reading, like default credentials or just like no credentials. It didn't say that, but how it probably, I'd have to guess it's probably something like that. So that administrative interface was exposed either way. They logged in and they got the creds, but that is like the same story that happens time and time again. In terms of root account usage, like that's scary if that's true. Like, and this is totally separate, like you said, from this particular instance, but that is scary if it's 73%. I don't know. I'm skeptical.
Yeah, and I've got to wonder where they actually pulled that number from, right? Lies and statistics, right? But I don't know if it would be that shocking though, right? I mean, you think about how most companies utilize AWS, and it's probably not the larger ones that have a well-defined cloud security, methodology or cloud security, program that they just do everything using the root account, right?
Yeah, which Evan Johnson had teased with a potential blog post coming out where he promised that you could have an organization that didn't have any AWS creds but could still operate inside of AWS, and that sounds awesome. And I totally can't wait to read it. I forget what he said he was using for that, but I think it was a combination of tools, but that sounds really awesome. My guess is it involves STS, Security Token Service, which is, for those that aren't familiar with AWS, STS basically gives you a temporary set of credentials that are time expiring depending on how long you said that they should expire. So those STS credentials also have a policy attached to them, meaning you could say, hey, I'm going to dish out these temporary credentials. They expire within, we'll say, 12 hours, and they only have access to our RDS instances to manage those. Or here's a 1 hour token that allows you to do something with billing, like read a billing statement. So you can really be granular in your policy, but also in the fact that you're not like hard coding AWS credentials into your source. I say that because it's not just like you can give a person an STS. You can also basically create an STS or create a role that's attached to an instance, and that role gets STS. So like they get the token for that role. And meaning the EC2 instance, for example, has a role attached to it. That role gets temporary credentials that are rolled, like, I don't know, every 12, 24 hours, whatever it is. And basically it allows your code to, instead of storing in your source code hard-coded credentials, you can, what it does is, like, and I think Paperclip is an example, it'll curl on that EC2 machine 169 dot whatever, it's like the local IP that runs on that machine. It'll download the metadata credential file, and then it's got a temporary set of credentials that it can work with. And again, like, you don't have to do anything in terms of storing any access keys in your source code.
Yeah. Well, and that plays right in, actually, this hack and the description of how STS actually works, right, plays right into that other suggested discussion topic for tonight, Ken, which is a blog post that was up on portswigger.net from July of last year, which covers a whole bunch of basically hidden attack surfaces of HTTP, right? And Ken, do you have that link if you want to post that one out as well?
I am, because I'm still reading it. It's such a long read. Portswigger.
Yep.
There we go. Hopefully that comes through right.
All right. So once you pull that up, or my take on it initially is that it really takes advantage of the HTTP implementations for reverse proxies and leaking data out using Collaborator, right? So who's not sure who the author here on this one is. It's listed all the way at the bottom. Oh, it's James Kettle. Okay. So James released a Collaborator Everywhere Burp Suite extension to actually help decloak some of these backend systems, right? So for those of you that aren't familiar with Collaborator, it's a Burp extension, or no, it's not an extension, right? It's a portion of Burp that actually listens for requests from the application. So this is how we identify server-side request forgery, right? So when you push some data to an application and the application in turn requests that data from somewhere else or requests some resource from another location, that is server-side request forgery. And we use Collaborator to actually detect that, right? There is a Collaborator instance that Burp runs that'll actually help you identify that, or you can set up your own instance. But it's another piece of software that actually runs and just listens for requests, whether that be web requests or DNS requests that a server is making based on a user's input. So what James has done and what he started to enumerate is the different places within a request that you can inject collaborator URLs to see where the application starts making different requests. And in addition to this, actually using different terminators and characters to access resources that may not be available to you, but that the application there, or may not be accessible externally, but the application or the reverse proxy that you're talking to can access on an internal network. Right. So in a nutshell, that's what this is talking about, is targeting those hidden HTTP resources or things that central application has access to that you don't necessarily have access to from an external resource, right? Ken, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and one note of the and I'm not sure who had brought this to our attention. They kind of wanted to discuss, but for that person, if they're not, or just anybody watching, like you can set up your own Burp Collaborator server by, I think it's just a command line switch within Burp, and you can start up your own collaborator server that if you don't want like your target calling out to Portswigger's server. But it's sort of the same. It's not sort of. It's the same thing that we had talked about a few episodes back. At least the concept, which is server-side request forgery, mucking about with different headers to get it to, or not headers. Sorry, different input headers, path parameters, whatever body parameters. Messing around with all that to see if you can get get a site to call out to you. And apologies, I'm also reading this to see if there's anything super unique to that he's like doing here.
Yeah. So the request was from Andrew Smith.
Okay.
On Twitter.
Because I say that because I know he had mentioned load balance. What I'm saying is I read something about having issues with load balancing. So one of the things he mentions is that there was an issue with, I think Yahoo is who he mentions, where they had 3 different versions of the site up, and the load balancer was was sending requests in a round robin fashion. And so that means with each request to the app, again, just reiterating for anybody who's not familiar, each time a request comes in, there's different metrics to decide which resource, which server to send it to. So let's say I had 3 different requests, then only one of those 3 was hitting a server that was actually vulnerable. Then that kind of it makes it a bit difficult to detect, right? Because think about one request with all the different places, all the different inputs on that one request, all of them have to be fuzzed, and then you are hoping that you're hitting the right server, or you're sending enough requests to eventually get that metric to hit that metric that forwards it to the right server, and then that server calls off to yours.
And that's the whole reason that he did the Collaborator Everywhere Burp Suite extension. So it normally the most current versions of Burp run server-side request forgery attacks, right? If you're running a scanner, but it doesn't necessarily put them everywhere, right? So the Burp Collaborator, or the Collaborator Everywhere extension, actually starts putting them on every single request, right? That's the whole point of it, so that you can track back a request to Collaborator from any previous request that you made, so that you know exactly where it's actually happening, right? So it's just extending, like the extension makes sense. So instead of just searching for specific instances of server-side request forgery, it's tagging each request with a SSRF ID that you can use to look up later, right? The interesting thing that I found on this was that the amount of manual work that actually goes into it, right? And this is maybe what Andrew was was asking about when he talked about out-of-band vulnerability discovery is there's no like one good way to actually exploit one of those vulnerabilities. The blog post from James goes through a number of different situations that he ran into, right? The misrouting of requests, specific implementations that allowed for an @ symbol instead of a slash and then appended that, that the proxy itself was allowing for get or set commands. So you could change things around if you could do that local call, the host ID, when the host ID actually gets implemented versus having the URL or having the host in the initial get / request at the very top for HTTP 1.1, right? So there's a number of different locations and vulnerabilities in play within this single blog post. But the takeaway is that it's very manual. And the best vulnerabilities, in my experience, are manual. And that's where we end up getting you get a lot more payout from the bug bounties is when you dig a little bit deeper, right? Yeah, it's great to jump on and find the cross-site scripting very quickly and see if you can get your money that way. But most of the time, the more interesting vulnerabilities and the ones that we like to explore, like this blog post, are the ones that actually take a little bit of thought and a little bit of scratching the surface before actually finding something that could potentially lead to a higher risk or a higher scored vulnerability, right?
Yeah, it's super unique in terms of like, is the question how would you actually leverage SSRF to?
I think so, right? I think that's what Andrew was asking. And Andrew, if you're listening, hey, feel free to pipe up. If not, send us an email and we can address it later.
I mean, I have an example. I like kind of hesitant to post it. I think I'll send. Sorry, I'm just thinking. It's already public.
You have an example of SSRF and how that actually.
Yeah, I do. It's public, so fuck it. I'm just gonna post it. Let's see. Put it in the links here. So it came out of a bug bounty actually for GitHub, as a matter of fact. But it's public knowledge and it's been out here, so I'm not giving away anything. I just had to think about it for a second. I'm like, how, but it's really, if you read through this, it's 4 different vulnerabilities chained together. It's not easy. It's super complicated. Effectively, if I'm not mistaken, I think he took GitHub Enterprise, deobfuscated it, found some CSRF, then used that CSRF to use like a URL that is within the RFC format, but wasn't thought of, right? In the sense of like what was whitelisted for, doesn't matter what they use, the format they use. You can read about it in that article, and I'll post it on the description of the video. They kind of bypassed the like IP schema expectations that were allowed or disallowed rather. And then they were able to call out to a Graphite instance, call a shutdown, since you can just, it's just basically the URL was http://0 port 9200 _ shutdown, right? So there were a few things in that blog post. I'll let the readers, again, I'll put the link out there for people to read. But yeah, John says, double check that link. Only Chinese for me. Let me see. I used. Oh yeah, no, it's good point, John. See, this is the problem I'm having. Is that some of these? This is why we're moving to Slack. Because some of these links just don't make it in. It's not great. I will try again.
So yeah, it sounds like Neil had fun chasing that one down.
Yeah. Again, we need to have him on. He's got some, I'm sure, some really good stories. So
well, and that's like and this is it. Like this ties straight into what I was saying about it being custom, right? So this one using the 0 for localhost, which is, that's completely valid HTTP or a completely valid IP address. That's the custom portion of the attack, right? That you maybe wouldn't necessarily think about, because if you put in 127.0.0.1, which is probably the burp default in scanner, that may not return, right? Maybe it does now. Maybe 8.0 is included because it is, it was in this blog post, or somebody's included in the payload list. But that's not always the case, right? It's usually the more interesting vulnerabilities that you've got to tease out where those breakdowns are, right? And I mean, this always goes back to the point that I like to make, that kind of the best application security people are people that have built applications, right? Because they do tend to recognize where someone forgets about a specific RFC. I mean, if you had never read the HTTP spec, you would not realize that the 0 represented localhost. So at some point, he had to dig into that to actually figure that out, right?
Yeah, it's well, and the other thing with RFCs and schemas and whatnot, I mean, they change enough that, like, I say that at the same time, I'll tell you right now, the Tangle Web, I still find that to be something that's I can still use, I can still reference, and it still has a pretty good grip on how things on the web in general work. But things change, obviously, so it's just a difficult job in general. But in terms of I don't know, like, I think Collaborator for me has done a pretty good job with like detecting call outs to my server. But yeah, in terms of exploitation, it's always such a super, like, what can you do? I don't know. What can you do? You have to really, like, dig in and figure out. And, like, that's kind of difficult when you don't know, when you don't have a lot of visibility into the, like, target that you're dealing with. I'm definitely not an expert at exploiting SSRF without having, like, good insight into your target. Which I think, by the way, is why I'm, like, really pumped for Jason to come on, because he deals with things in a more black box fashion. And for those that aren't familiar with black box, that basically means no access to source code, no, like, locally running instance of the app, no real understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. You get presented with a URL, maybe some creds, and then you're told, hey, find what you can in this target. Or you're just given a URL and said, find what you can. Or you're told, here's a list of domain, or here's a top level domain, and find anything on all of the subdomains you can. So it varies quite a bit, and that's a really different test, and it's a really different set of tricks. And I almost feel like a little bit different of a skill set than if you're doing, more either defense or sort of like this hybrid assessment, which we've talked about, which is you have access to source and a running application as well.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is, right? The ability. I know that the new, like, sexy InfoSec term would be threat hunting, right? That seems to be what people have settled on. But really, it's a dynamic assessment where you're looking for high value or high risk vulnerabilities. Similar to kind of what a red team does, but there's, for some reason, people have latched onto the threat hunting term for, hey, we're looking across the organization. The scope isn't necessarily as defined or as limited as what we traditionally look at from an application security perspective, right? Yeah. So, I mean, as far as SSRF goes, that was the other interesting thing that I found just glancing at the blog post that you threw up there, Ken, was the fact that he gets to the end of one section and says, okay, there are several limitations in this SSRF, right?
Right.
So, you've got to know what those limitations are in order to exploit them. So if you can't control the post data and the HTTP headers, realistically, some of the other things that James did in his blog post wouldn't necessarily be vulnerable, right, within GitHub Enterprise or within that instance that you're dealing with.
For sure.
But that doesn't mean that you're secure if you don't, or if you do. There's all sorts of things that you're depending on, right? There's other libraries that you're calling that you may want to take a look at, right? But identifying them, the Collaborator Everywhere tool, or even just Burp Suite Scanner, has a pretty good track record of identifying those locations.
Well, I did want to ask him. I'm kind of shifting gears. I did want to ask him to. Maybe I can just go find it. There's I wanted to bring up something we had talked about after last week's episode with regards to LocoMocoSec and helping folks be a part of it that wouldn't normally have the opportunity. I'll look through the link if I don't. I'll look in here for it unless he posts it sooner. But I did want to talk about that at some point. So actually, I think, by the way, this was a little bit of a troll from David Corsi. Did you see what he had sent about the whole like Twitter and Ruby on Rails, like being basically someone blaming the limitations of Ruby on Rails for why Twitter couldn't deal with harassment sooner?
I didn't actually, but do tell.
That was the gist of it. I mean, I guess somebody put out what was this in Vanity Fair? Real reputable news source, folks. Anyways, it's this long ranty article. But basic gist was that was it, right? Like, we couldn't. I'm trying to find the exact quote they took from it. At the same time, her defenders say Harvey has been forced to clean up a mess that Twitter should have fixed years ago. Twitter's backend was initially built on Ruby on Rails, a rudimentary web application framework that made it nearly impossible to find a technical solution to the harassment problems. So that was put out there. Like, I don't give a shit about, defending Ruby or Rails or anything like that. I mean, yes, I know Ruby and I've written Ruby, but it's like, if I'm going to if I'm going to hammer a nail, I'm going to use a hammer, right? If I'm going to turn a pipe, I'm going to use a wrench, just whatever suits your whatever tool suits the job. But that's kind of always been my approach to languages. But in this case, I think if I had to guess, what do I know, right? But I'm going to guess that somebody completely misinterpreted what was said, or I feel like there was probably something said that made them believe that Ruby on Rails was to blame, and it might have been something more along the lines of, well, we made some design trade-off decisions focused on these things. We were dealing with scaling with Ruby on Rails. That was our focus. I don't know, something along those lines. And probably heard, oh yeah, Ruby on Rails wasn't good enough, so that's why they didn't handle harassment. I mean, that's ridiculous. I just have to believe that's not the
that's not the
full story.
Yeah, people have a tendency to latch on to things like that, right? They understand, Ruby on Rails, and we weren't able to do that because of it, right? That's what they hear. I mean, how often do we deal with that when telling people about vulnerabilities, you're trying to couch it because you're like, oh, well, this is a problem because of, SQL injection. And that's the one thing that they latch on to is SQL injection, as opposed to what the real issue is that you're not training your developers, right? So.
Yeah. I don't, I don't know what else there's to say on that. But just been it's always like that with just, I don't know, between tech communities and news communities. That's why I like, what's his name? Steve Reagan from CSO. He's a journalist. I'm always kind of I've met him, done an interview with him, and I've read a lot of what he's written, and I always like to read his stuff. But most journalists don't have the kind of background that he has, and you know, skill set, integrity, etc. So it's kind of a crazy thing, but I know it was kind of like a joke when Corsi had sent that, but it was definitely something that like I had been thinking about. So came at the right time. And I'm still like scrolling, trying to find this link from.
No,
Neil.
I think I remember I remember that there was an article about an engineer that split from GitHub, right? And it had to do with, you know, some sort of transparency, or I vaguely remember something along those lines, right? But, you know, having dealt with multiple large companies, right, you know that there's always two sides to the story. Anyway.
Definitely.
And it's not necessarily a technical issue, and it usually isn't. It's usually a people issue. Which kind of, you know, brings me to another topic. I know we're, you know, kind of through the list that, you know, the technical list that we've got, right? But I was talking with a friend earlier today about information security in general and kind of security people and how they approach, right, sales, right, in general, and dealing with people and trying to sell their services. You know, no matter what you think, where you're at in an organization, whether you're embedded or you are a consultant, it goes along with building your career in actually selling yourself and making connections with people as opposed to just technology. Right? I think, you know, Ken, you've been in a number of different organizations, and how often is it that the technical solution is for any given problem, whether that's application security or, you know, development, that the solution is only technical in nature?
I mean, I always say tech is easy, people are hard. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of some concrete examples. Yeah, I mean, it definitely comes down to, well, this is actually, so I was responding to, oh, man, I'm going to get long-winded for a second. So I was responding to this whole request to, there's like this book coming out. It's going to be on security people, how they kind of, how they got their start, how they got in, like, you know, just their thoughts on the industry, et cetera. And that's going to go to, the proceeds are going to go to charity. Anyways, in it, one of the questions was like, you know, about like false things in the cybersecurity industry. And one of those things that I had responded with was like thinking we're more than we are. And that's, so like, you know, I think anybody who's read the Phoenix Project or both, like worked in an organization or both, you definitely know that we're like one small part of a business. Typically, anyways, we're a pretty small part of the business. We are not more important than we think we are. Oftentimes, when it comes to when it comes to decision making, I've definitely seen folks who are a little bit more junior take a decision to, like, they've given input, decision goes a different way than they had recommended, and that becomes like kind of a personal slight, but it's not, right? It just may be that there's other priorities, and that happens quite a bit. Again, that is business. So long-winded way of saying, yeah. same thing I started with, which was tech is easy, people are hard. We're not that important, and we're just one small part of a business.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna. That's kind of the point that I was driving towards, is that you're constantly selling yourself and your ideas, right? And if you don't make some sort of personal connection with people, like build some sort of a relationship with them, it's very difficult for them to relate with what you're saying, right? You can't always just be the tech guy, even though they appreciate the tech guy. There's got to be some sort of a personal relationship if you want to really build your career, and that goes as you're in information security, you're going to a security conference, you start talking to people, you start talking about tech and what you're interested in, but that's you're building a personal relationship over the tech and over the things that you're doing, as opposed to your regular like familiar relationships or relationships outside of the tech industry. But at some level, you've got to make that personal connection, right? Whether it's with your manager, whether it's with the development team. Those development teams that you have success with, guess what? Those are usually the guys that you're working with, and you're building those relationships in addition to working on technology.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And don't one recommendation is don't I think anybody like Jerry definitely I've seen him talk about this, which is you can't have like an iron fist all the time. You have to realize that you're going to have to make some compromises, and that way when you actually need to you need to take a stand, it's taken legitimately. So, but I think that's common sense. But like you said, you do that, you build relationships, that'll take you a long way. It's not just about the technical aspect, although that's pretty important.
Part of the reason it came up, I was talking to a friend, and he was, he works for a consulting organization, and they're in with this really big client, and after 3 years of them spending 6+ figures a year with them as a consulting org, they just cut it off completely, right? They cut back to something like a small like $10,000 to $15,000 project for 1 year. It's when you're a small consulting organization, that's a significant, if you go from 6 figures and you drop down to 1/10 of that, that can have serious consequences, being able to employ people, being able to keep people busy. And they started asking why that was. And what it turned out is, hey, guess what? We've been, this big organization, we've been trying to manage the whole thing over email, right? We've never actually taken these guys out to dinner. We've never met up with them at a conference. And guess what happens, right? The next time that somebody else comes along and bids at a slightly lower price, guess who they're going to go with? It's going to be the guy that they know, right?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's that's absolutely critical. I mean, and it's not just to to keep your contract. It's not just to for like financial gain. It's because like if you want to be successful in the sense of helping with legitimately positive change, you have to have people to do that, right? So it's politics, but it kind of, right, less scummy.
Less scummy,
just being a real person, making a true connection, different than a less scummy than a DC politician.
That's the bar that we're setting it at, right? As DC politician, and then
yeah, be less scummy than a DC politician. That's the bar we're aiming for. No, but I see your point, and
I mean, it's hard when you're embedded with an organization, right? Because you don't always think about the fact that you are trying to build relationships with teams. If I'm on the security team in a production security role or an application security role, or product security, I should say, I don't like my exposure to those team members that are trying to build something isn't the same as somebody that's embedded in the team. It's just not. So actually getting them to push my fix above whatever other features they're being pushed on is going to be very difficult unless I have their trust, unless I'm able to actually talk to them knowledgeably and they know that what I'm saying, I've got their back.
Plus, guess what? You will screw up. Like, it's gonna happen. Meaning, like, I'll give you a perfect example, a pretty concrete example. How many times have you been a part of like a consulting group that's gone in, assessed an app, and then, like, nowadays it's bug bounties, right? But like, what is it? 7 years ago, it was other consultancies. So, like, you might have other consultancies also working on some of the apps that, or coming back, like you do your assessment one quarter, they do theirs the next quarter, just for due diligence. And so, like, when you're given a week, basically when your scope's not great, there's always that chance that you miss something, right?
Yep.
And so they're going to wonder, why did you miss that? And you have to start answering questions. And guess what? You know, having a good that's just one area where having a good relationship can certainly make a difference. So yeah. Whatever.
Anyway, I mean, that was just on the top of my mind today after having this discussion with this friend, just because it's a critical piece of the industry, right? The fact that we know each other, that we do this podcast, is because we've been in the trenches together doing this for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you've got to foster that somehow, right? If you're looking to get into the industry, that's a good way to do it. Identify someone that's already there, that's already in the trenches, and keep at it together, right? Whether that's going and doing capture the flag events together, or whatever it is, right? Going to conferences. At least it gives you a community that you can build from and build those relationships up. And then remember that those people that you're dealing with on a daily basis in your company, in your consultancy, are also ones that you've got that you have to sell yourself to as well. So I know I'm off on a weird tangent.
No, it doesn't matter. I'm here messing with my mic, trying to figure this thing out. It's acting weird. Like this little, but yeah, no, I mean, I get it. And actually, as a perfect segue into getting into the industry early in your career, etc. And I think we'll next episode also promote this at the top of the episode. It kind of just slipped my mind, but so LocoMocaSec conference happening in Hawaii. A lot of great like AppSec folks are there speaking, keynoting, teaching, etc. But like, it's a good place to network. They have a diversity like sponsorship program, so you can sponsor someone's travel, so airfare, hotel tickets, etc. So I posted the link in chat. I'll do it in the description, and then also from our Twitter account, it's at absoluteappsec. Pretty easy. We retweeted the link so that if you want to go back and you want to nominate someone, you want to help out in any way, you can definitely. Sorry, Neil wrote something. He wrote "and training," and I'm trying to think, what did I leave out that about training? The conference has training. Don't know if I mentioned that. But yeah, for the diversity sponsorship program, I think this is an awesome thing. Seth, I know you and I were kind of talking about this last week. We really would like to see, a more diverse AppSec field, and something like this goes a long way towards it. So, oh, sorry, training is included in the diversity sponsorship. I was like, I'm not sure what he meant. Okay, thanks, Neil, for clearing that up. But so next week, though, we will mention that again at the top of the episode, just to, because I meant to do it today, but I forgot. It slipped my mind. So anyways, help somebody out if you can.
Yeah, it's always good, right? But again, the call to get involved and to go see what you've got locally. I mean, if you've got the ability to go to Hawaii for LocoMocaSec, Did I say that right? Locomoco sec. Sorry. I mean, obviously, right? That would be awesome. So,
hey, where's the Hack West?
yeah, that was going to be my next thing. Is if you're in Salt Lake City, right? There's both B-sides and Hack West, and Hack West is running March 21st through the 23rd. Hit me up and I'll get you a code for for either sponsorship or some sort of discounted registration. There's a lot that's going on. We're gonna have voting machines, which should be fun, right? The ones that they use in Utah for elections. So yeah, it'll be good. So come on by. And again, a lot of that's going to be just come and meet the community and actually try something out. The more hands-on that you get at any of these, the better off it's going to be. I had a hard time with that when I initially got into the industry. I was pretty quiet when I would go to meetups and things like that, just not trusting, again, the imposter syndrome, right? I was coming from somewhere outside of security, from more of an admin development background, and didn't have quite the confidence that I probably should have, because everybody was fairly new to the industry at that point. But it took a long time for me to actually find a voice and actually speak up. And that it just takes a little bit of courage at times. But if you're going to be in Salt Lake City, hit me up, because I'd love to meet you. I know we've got people that listen that'll be out. That's Jerry or others. Ken, what are you hitting late in the next couple months?
Well, I already mentioned Locomoco Sec. This is kind of, in April, I'm going to do an OWASP Nova talk with Chris Gates, which is a, like precursor practice to a talk we're going to give, maybe, I think, at You Shot the Sheriff in Brazil. So that should be in May, and that I'm excited about that. I don't want to talk about too much what we're doing, but all I can say is like AWS attack stuff. So I've done a lot of defense. For those who don't know, like I've done a lot of on the defensive side of AWS, explaining how to set things up securely and all that. Building some scripts around doing some of that. This is the opposite, so should be fun. I'm excited.
Cool. Yeah, my next speaking stuff has to do with those security headers that we talked about. I mean, it will be Hack West. We'll be talking about the different security headers that are out there, and some of the research I've done with Risk Recon on all the data set that they have and what they're seeing. It's been pretty interesting. But a portion of that, I'll actually be doing it with Justin Larson, Phantom Traveler, right? So we're going to talk through how to actually set that and show some demos on what it looks like when it is set versus when it isn't, do some comparisons with Chrome and Firefox and others. So it should be kind of fun. Again, it's more on the defensive side for sure, but there may be some offensive in there, especially looking at some of the attacks that we talked about tonight, right? There's interesting things that you can do with those security headers as well that may lead to something like SSRF. So.
Well, I'm excited, by the way, to see the analysis of that data, for sure. Like, because we discussed a little bit with cores, and I mean, when it comes to cores and CSP and that whole conversation we had with Evan, I can't wait to see some actual statistics around these things, and it should be fun. Yep. I was supposed to get David. So here's the thing. I was supposed to actually schedule David Corsi and Stefan for tonight, and I totally forgot we were doing this podcast until like last night or this morning. I can't remember. Anyways, so like we're definitely going to have them back on for a part 2. As I said, next week, Jason Haddix. I know we've got a bunch of people that have already agreed to come on. And so like, I think for a good, at least 4 or 5 episodes, we'll have special guests on to discuss interesting things. So should be good. Excited.
And then like Ken said, the special guests are always great, but we still like to have topics to throw at them. So if you've got anything that you're interested in or you're dealing with currently, right? Whether that is something similar to SSRF, feel free to hit us up, send us a DM on Twitter, or email us. You're probably on a Slack channel with us, I'm sure, or you can find us in some way. But at absoluteappsec on Twitter, or just ping us through YouTube as well.
Yeah, we almost got a site going, so absoluteappsec.com should be up soon. So we'll update next episode to see if we have that up yet.
Cool. All right. Anything else for tonight, Ken?
Nope. What's that?
People are hard.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, technology is easy. People are hard. Is that
That's the takeaway.
Takeaway for this week?
Yeah.
And SSRF is cool, but it's a very manual process.
SSRF is hard. People are harder. There
you go.
All in one.
All in one. Summarized by Ken. And make sure to put the lid or close the feeder to your hamster cage.
Yeah. Sorry. Good luck.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll talk soon.